That night at Half Oak, surrounded by friends, laughter, and half-empty glasses, I thought I'd lighten the mood with a little joke. I said my body count was probably higher than everyone else's combined. People laugh, but not really. It was that awkward, polite kind of laugh people give when they don't know how to react. Callum didn't laugh at all. He just stared at me, quiet, unreadable, then set down his fork with deliberate calm. I teased him, told him to relax, that it was just a joke. Still nothing. The silence stretched, so I filled it with nervous chatter about men being too sensitive. When the check came, he stood, left money on the table, and walked out. Everyone watched me, frozen. I forced a smirk and muttered that he just couldn't handle a confident woman. At home, he didn't argue or demand an explanation. He calmly packed a small bag and said he'd stay at his mother's for a few days. I told him he was overreacting. He looked at me and said, "You think it's funny because you're never the one being laughed at." Then he left. The next morning, his mug was gone. His wedding ring sat on the counter. I laughed at first, until I realized my hands were shaking. The house felt hollow, too quiet, too clean. I told myself he'd cool off and come home soon. At work, I told the story like a sitcom anecdote. A few people chuckled, but one woman said her husband would have left too. I brushed it off, claiming men these days couldn't handle honesty. Deep down, though, something twisted inside me. That night, when I called him, his mother texted instead, asking me to stop reaching out until he was ready. That stung. I vented to my mom, who told me not to apologize for my sense of humor. She said he'd come back once he realized how silly he was being. A few days later, I went to the house to grab some papers. His office door was half open. On the desk was a neat stack of printed emails from a law firm called Grant & Foster LLP. My stomach dropped. I took a photo but tried to convince myself I was imagining things. That night, I messaged him, saying we needed to talk. Hours later, he replied, "There's nothing left to discuss." I stared at the words until my phone went dark, realizing he might actually mean it. A week passed. A mutual friend invited us both to her birthday dinner. I went, convinced he wouldn't make a scene. When he arrived, calm and composed, a strange sense of pride surfaced, like I could still get under his skin. The conversation turned light, and I made another joke about having more experience than anyone there. This time, there was no laughter, just silence. Callum looked at me quietly. That explains a lot. My smile faltered. I accused him of trying to humiliate me. He said, "You do that well enough on your own." Then he reached into his jacket, placed an envelope beside my plate, and said, "You like attention? Here's something worth talking about." Without another word, he walked out. My fingers trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside were divorce papers dated 2 weeks before that first dinner. He'd already made up his mind before I even told the joke. Everyone at the table pretended not to notice as I forced a smile, muttering that he'd calm down eventually. But on the drive home, I realized he wasn't coming back. Later, when I tried to laugh, it sounded wrong. Strained, artificial, nothing like me. After that night, I couldn't stop replaying it. The papers, already printed, waiting, as if all he needed was an excuse. I told myself he wouldn't actually go through with it. That once he saw me trying, he'd let it go. I sent long messages about love, misunderstanding, about how jokes can hurt but don't mean anything. He never replied. One afternoon, I went back to the house to collect a few things. His study door was locked, but I knew where he kept the spare key. Inside, everything was unervingly tidy. Folders lined up perfectly, each labeled in his precise handwriting. Finances, messages, custody. I opened one folder and froze. Screenshots of my social media posts, texts, comments from friends about how wild I used to be before marriage. Another folder held receipts and bank transfers, annotated in red. Misuse of shared funds. Each page felt like a quiet accusation. I sat in his chair and whispered to the empty room that he'd gone too far. As I flipped through more pages, I realized this hadn't been sudden. He'd been documenting everything for months, maybe longer, building a case step by step. While I thought we were arguing, he was quietly preparing. When he came home later, I confronted him. He didn't shout. He just told me to lock up when I was done. I asked if he was really doing this. He said calmly, "You already did," and went upstairs as if nothing had shattered. 2 weeks later, we sat across from each other at mediation. I wore a navy dress, simple, composed. Callum was already there with his lawyer, calm, almost peaceful. I smiled, hoping for some flicker of recognition. There was none. The mediator asked who wanted to start. I did. I explained how everything had been blown out of proportion, that it was just a joke gone wrong, that he'd turned humor into punishment. His lawyer opened a folder. Printed pages, screenshots, statements, messages between me and Blake from years ago. My stomach twisted. I insisted it didn't mean anything. The lawyer claimed it showed a pattern of public disrespect. Callum sat silently the whole time. When asked if he had anything to say, he quietly replied, "I'm only here for closure." I tried to take control again. I said, men like him couldn't handle confident women I never cheated on. The mediator looked at me gently. "No one said you did." Somehow, that cut deeper than anything else. When the summary was read, it was final. Property and custody awarded to Callum. Immediate separation. My throat tightened. I looked at him, hoping for mercy. He nodded, thanked the mediator, and turned to me. "You wanted everyone to laugh," he said. "Now they have their ending." Then he walked out. Returning home, the house felt hollow. Drawers emptied, closets half open, his scent fading. On the kitchen table sat a thick envelope with my name. Inside were the final papers, stamped and neat. No note, no emotion, no anger. Just black ink and the end of us. I called my mother. She apologized, saying maybe this time I'd gone too far. I told her it was just honesty, that humor shouldn't destroy a marriage. She said it wasn't humor. It was cruelty pretending to be. I hung up before she could continue. For a long while, I wandered to the quiet house, touching remnants he'd left. A chipped mug, a lone sock, our son's old drawing on the fridge. The silence hurt more than any argument ever had. "It was just a joke," I whispered, as if saying it again could rewrite the truth. The room stayed still. That night, I sat in his chair, staring at the empty space where his computer had been. I thought about how calm he'd been, how certain.